Hey friends, happy Thursday. Thanks for joining us as we are working our way through the 20th chapter of Luke's Gospel on our way towards Holy Week next week. And I'm so grateful that you are with us today as we are finishing up this 20th chapter and continuing to read through these last days of Jesus' earthly ministry. Let's begin as we have throughout the season of Lent by saying together our prayer of confession. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we have done and by what we have left undone. We have not loved you with our whole heart. We have not loved our neighbors as ourselves. We are truly sorry, and we humbly repent. For the sake of your Son, Jesus Christ, have mercy on us and forgive us, that we may delight in your will and walk in your ways to the glory of your name. Amen. All right, y'all. So as I said, we are in Jerusalem at this point with Jesus, and the tension between he and the religious leaders is at an all-time high. They are openly looking for ways to trap him, to destroy him. In the meantime, his popularity with the crowds continues to grow, and so he is teaching openly in the temple, and the religious authorities are sort of throwing everything they have at him. In fact, some of the religious authorities who don't agree with one another, because they are not a monolithic group, and within the Jewish religious leadership at that time, you've got sects, sects, or groups of folks who are wildly opposed to each other. They cannot stand each other, but they are unified, at least some of them are, around the destruction of Jesus. Jesus must be stopped. And so today we sort of take a turn in another one of those groups appearing here and challenging Jesus, and that is the Sadducees. We've talked about the Sadducees a little before. They don't get as much press in the Gospels, even though it's likely that they may have had the most to do with Jesus being turned over to the Roman authorities. The Sadducees were wealthy, they were aristocratic, they were centered around the temple, and they had a lot of power. They only believed in the authority of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, the books of Moses. They didn't believe in the rabbinical teachings, the prophets, the other writings like the Pharisees did, and so they had a lot of conflict with the Pharisees. They didn't believe in the resurrection because while the Pharisees believed there would be a final resurrection of the dead at the close of history, the Sadducees didn't find evidence for that in the first 5 books of the Bible. So a lot of conflict, and again, the Sadducees were basically wiped out when the temple was destroyed, just a couple of decades after Jesus' resurrection, and so they don't survive in any meaningful way after the temple is gone, because the temple is so critical to who they are. But they likely played a very significant role in Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. So verse 27 of chapter 20 begins by saying, "Some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him a question. 'Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother.'" This is an Old Testament commandment that was infrequently used and sort of strange to our modern hearing, called levirate marriage. And because leaving children and leaving a legacy was the most important thing in that culture, if John married Susan, and John died, leaving Susan as a widow, but also Susan had no children to protect her and to carry on John's name. John had a little brother named Ted, and Ted is not married. It was Ted's role to marry Susan so that they could have children, which would also preserve John's legacy. I know that's hard for us to make sense of, and it's not necessarily how we would act in 2021. Or please don't act like that. But this is the way that ancient culture worked, because again, that was a way of preserving the memory and preserving the legacy of that man who had died, is to make sure that his line went on through his family. And so they're quoting that levirate marriage idea, that this is what's meant to happen if a man dies and leaves a widow with no children. And then they sort of tell a parable of their own here, beginning with verse 29. Now there were 7 brothers. The first, that's John. We don't have characters for these, but let's just say, all right, 7 brothers. The first one married and died childless. Then the second and the third married the wife of the first. And so in the same way, all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. So you've got a man who had 7 brothers, so 8 total, and they go through Levirate marriage. The original husband dies and leaves the wife childless. The second one steps in and marries the woman. He also leaves her childless. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh brother, they all do not produce children, so they all end up marrying the wife of the first, the oldest brother. Their question is, in the resurrection, therefore, this is like a math problem. In the resurrection, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Now they're asking this and they're sort of chuckling under their breath, because remember, the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. And so one of the pieces they're doing is they're sort of like poking holes in even the idea of the resurrection. And if it's true that this is the way marriage is meant to work, then how in the world in the afterlife would you pick who she was actually married to when they're all in the afterlife together? So this is not a genuine question. This is meant to point out in their minds the logical fallacy of the resurrection, the logical fallacy of an afterlife. And so they're not asking a genuine question of Jesus. And Jesus said to them, in some ways, Jesus is going to say, you're asking a question of this age that does not fit the age to come. He says it like this: those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. Jesus' answer is that you're asking a question about this earthly existence, and you can't use the same rules to talk about the earthly existence and then ask questions of the resurrection, ask question of what life will be like after we are raised from the dead. And in Jesus' mind, that Levirate marriage piece, in its essence, was a way of preserving life in the here and now, that it was a way of keeping life going even in the face of death. And that's why marriage is important in Jesus' eyes, is because in some ways it keeps life going even in the face of death. Without marriage, without procreation, there could be no sort of perseverance of life. But in an age to come, when death has been defeated and the dead are raised to life, there is no need for that. And so Jesus says, in the afterlife, there will be no marriage, nor will anyone be given in marriage, because there will be no need. So he knows they're not asking a serious question, but he points out the fundamental fallacy in the way they're even thinking about it. They're thinking about rules that apply to this age and trying to extrapolate them into rules to come. Now, it's really important, similar to what we've talked about with some of the parables that we've talked about. When we get into sensitive subjects like marriage, divorce, death, who's going to be married to in the afterlife, it's important for us to understand, if this makes sense, Jesus is not setting out like, hey, today I want to teach you all about marriage in the afterlife. That's not what this is. This is a response to conflict. It's a response to tension. Some of his teachings on divorce are the same way. Jesus is not sort of writing a thesis on what he thinks about marriage. He's responding to a rather sarcastic, critical question from the Sadducees by using their own logic against them. So it's important that we listen to what Jesus says. We think about the intent with which Jesus is speaking, and we don't necessarily universalize these into commandments of Jesus. This is what Jesus thinks about this or that, if that makes sense. So the Sadducees try and trap him. Jesus sort of shows them the error of their thinking. And then he's going to go a little further here, beginning with verse 37. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed. Remember, they only read the books of Moses. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This is pointed out by Moses himself, Jesus said, in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. So this is brilliant and creative and clever. He's like, I know y'all don't think there's any evidence of the resurrection in the 5 books of Moses, but in the story of Moses' own call, what happens? It's the God of the living, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who calls Moses into this life of standing up for the Israelite people. God is not God of the dead, so why would he say I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob if those are dead? They are alive to him. This is so clever. Surprise, it's Jesus, and he's really smart. So let's look at verse 39. Then some of the scribes answered, "Teacher, you have spoken well." Again, because they don't know what else to say, for they no longer dared to ask him another question. But he's not done. They were trying to get off that train, and it is still rolling. So he said to them, "How can they say," in other words, the Psalms declare, "that the Messiah is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool.' David thus calls him Lord." David calls his son his his lesser, at least if he was physically a son. David calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? This was an incredibly important passage to the early Christians as they searched the Old Testament scriptures for sort of evidence of the Messiah in the way that Jesus was the Messiah in the Old Testament. The psalm was tremendously important. And so what we see Jesus doing here is, as the scribes, who are not the Sadducees, they may even enjoy the Sadducees getting slammed in the way Jesus did, but as they say, "Hey, you've done really well," Jesus is going to come after them and ask, "Hey, scribes, you copy the scriptures. Let's talk about the Psalms. How can David say to his son, how can he declare sort of this position of power over him if the Messiah is his son?" In other words, Jesus is pointing to the fact that the Messiah will be the son of David, but not just the son of David. Verse 45, in the hearing of all the people, he said to the disciples. In other words, he's talking to everyone. At least everyone can hear him, but he's really directing this to the disciples. "Beware of the scribes." Like, the scribes are right there, y'all. Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces. They love to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. I want you to see, again, when we talk about Jesus just as being somebody who is super nice all the time, and I have no idea why they took him to the cross, like, he is calling people out in their hearing. The scribes are standing right there, and he is dressing them down. He is like embarrassing them in front of the crowds when the temple is packed for the Passover, and the scribes were at least trying to feign sort of a compliment, like you've answered really well, and Jesus just is relentless in his attack on them. And again, this is so important for us to understand that Jesus is leaning into the tension created. He will not back away from who he is, from the gospel and the good news that he's come to proclaim, and that simultaneously makes him more and more popular with the crowds and less popular with the religious folks in power, and that will only heighten as we continue to read through the gospel. This weekend, you'll start to read chapter 21. We'll pick up with some of that on Monday as we begin Holy Week together. But I am excited so this Sunday will be Palm Sunday and the official beginning to Holy Week. It's the most important week of of the Christian year, and I hope that you will do everything you can to be a part of the worship experiences of your church, or if you don't have a church, or if we're your church, you'll do everything you can to be a part of Trinity's worship experiences as we move through this Holy Week together. Our readings for this coming weekend are Friday, if you'll read through the first 38 verses of the 21st chapter of Luke, and then on Saturday you'll read through the first 23 verses of chapter 22. So read all of chapter 21 on Friday, and then read the first 23 verses of 22 on Saturday. I'm so thankful for y'all, and looking forward to being in worship together or in worship online for Palm Sunday. We've got some special things planned, both in person but also with pre-recorded worship as we move into Holy Week, and we'll conclude our study on Luke next week as we make our way to the close of Luke's Gospel. I hope you have a lovely weekend. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon us all and grant us peace.